So this is our ID Masterclass. For those of you who are new to the webinars, this today is webinar number 100. So we started these webinars at the beginning of COVID. And we had no idea what we were going to do with, no one had any idea of how the world was going to go and where we were heading to, whether we would continue these, whether we'd still be in business. Think back to the fear and the uncertainty that was there in March of 2020. And we decided to bring a community of interested people together on a regular basis to help us all stay in stride, because we knew that no matter where the world went to, the best way to deal with it was from a place of being true to yourself and being in stride. And, what's been a really beautiful surprise to me was that even though things have settled down somewhat for many people, the community and the learning, the rich learning that's occurred through the sharing that goes on these webinars every couple of weeks has just been a great thing that people want to keep going. And so we've actually split them into two types of webinars. Once a month, we have what we call a Living in Stride, and that's a more public, more high-level webinar for everybody. And then the people that really want to dig deeper into ID, typically they're the people who are either a practitioner of ID, whether that's internally within a client or externally as a consultant or a coach, or just people that really want to build a more nuanced level of self-awareness. They're the people that join the second webinar each month, which we call the ID Masterclass. And that's what you're part of today. And so there's an expectation that there's already like a base level of awareness of ID. You don't need to be like black belt level, but there is like generally an understanding of the drives. If you are brand new, that's okay. You're welcome. Listen, you'll learn something. And I would just encourage you to share. If you have questions or reactions or anything to contribute, it's actually the interaction in these webinars that really is the most powerful piece. We pick a topic every month. This month, it's about leadership, and specifically leadership in 2023, with all of the things that have occurred in the world, what leadership style is going to thrive. So what I'm going to do is I will give you a refresh on what we quickly covered when we laid this topic up 2 weeks ago. But before we a couple of things to announce before we go there. First of all, this is webinar 100. So for many of you, you've been a part of that journey, either the entire way. I'm looking just at one screen here with people like Judy and Joe, you, Greg, have been wonderful, Amanda, Jim, Leonie, Susie McRae, there's been Patricia, so many people that have played, Ian, of course, have played a big role in helping build that community and contribute just really valuable insights to the group. We get to do this on a more intense basis coming up at the end of March. We have our annual conference here in Sydney. It's a full day of ID learning. So we just spend the whole day sharing with each other around different topics that we'll set up, and we have a program for it which we have already started distributing. One of the key speakers on that day is a guy. He's a 9th Dan in Taekwondo, Grandmaster Greg Wiley. He and a couple of his people are coming along to talk to us about what does it, when you have something structured with so much excellence all the way through, we think of black belt as being a great achievement, but what does it take to make it to something like 9th Dan? And what are the nuances around those levels of excellence that have parallels to how we can live our life outside of martial arts in just the business world and our personal lives. I've already had a snippet into some of the things he's going to be talking about and sharing. And honestly, if no one gets anything out of this other than me, it still makes it worthwhile for me. But it's just been powerful, some of the things he's going to be sharing. So if you are in Sydney or can make it to Sydney, we've already got some people from overseas that have made inquiries about coming. But it's a great day of learning and sharing and just getting to meet people. And then, as you'll see with the last bullet point, we're going to do that again in November in the US. So in California, we're still putting the exact date, the exact location together. But it'll be a similar program of rich ID in-person learning and sharing with a gala dinner at the end of it. So again, if anyone in Australia wants to be in America at that time, whether, for that day or for business or for pleasure, and you can plan it around November the 2nd, you're very welcome to come along to that day. We also have the certification program coming up. The next one is in April 19, 20, and the 3rd of May. They're over 3 different days. They are all done virtually. And then just the theme for this year is all about building a learning culture. We'll talk more about that as the weeks and months unfold. But we are reintroducing our ID belt grading model. It's a revised model. It'll be launched in its proper form at our conference in Sydney, but it's not restricted to just those people who are full-time practitioners of ID. This is now one of the things about it being revised. We're opening this up to everybody. So if you would like to have a structured program for developing your self-awareness, for living your life more true to you in terms of being in stride and learning the specific insights and strategies for how to do that, if you want to have more influence by being more true to yourself, this might give you something to think about and be rewarded with as you progress all the way through to Black Belt. And for the first time, we have a journey for Beyond Black. I know many of our Black Belts have been asking for that. So it's a really great year coming up, and we're looking forward to sharing it with you. Are there any questions or reactions before we keep going? Just take yourself off mute if there's anything on your mind. Or put it in the chat. If I keep going and you think of something, put it in the chat, we'll come back to it. All right, so with that, we've also put the calendars together for this year. We have one calendar for Australia. It's exactly the same for the US, but it's a day different. So to make it easy for people, we've just done exactly the same thing for the US and for Australia. And you can see we've got the Living in Stride webinars coded in blue, the ID masterclasses in green, the certification programs that are set, you can see there with the red box around them. And in the case of the US, the conference on the 2nd of November. For Australia, you can see it's here on the 30th of March. So this will be in the deck that we send out with the recording after today. All right. One of the things that we always start with in our masterclass is a check-in. And this is part of our ritual, given it's what we stand for, is just to take a moment to think about where are you today? If you think about yourself being in stride or out of stride, in stride being you being true to yourself, living aligned to your ID, and feeling that sense of flow, or, it's easy. It's not a grind to do what you're doing. A classic example is people say, you know what, even if I wasn't getting paid for this, I'd be doing it anyway. Even if no one else was assessed, I'd do it anyway. I just love doing this. And I feel so energized by it. You can see the things at the top of the chart here. That's what happens when you are living your life along this green arrow here, living in stride. But there are forces that pull us out to the left and to the right, that pull us off track, pull us out of stride. And not only does that rob you of all of the benefits at the top of the chart, you start to experience forms of stress and distress to varying degrees. Sometimes it's attitudinal, behavioral, motivational, but it can build up with more intensity to take its toll on your health. And to the point where, it gets quite chronic. And unless you've got medication or something of that form, or make some significant change, it would become, very serious and even life-threatening potentially, both mentally and physically. So it's a very serious model to me. It's the essence of what we're about. But to take the time, most people that do this well check in on this every day, and they think about when they're getting ready for the day, where am I today? And if I'm not at a high number, like if you think of it on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being where you're on this green arrow here in stride, and you might be a 3 or a 4, like way off stride. But I'm asking you today, what's your number? And I just ask you to put it in the chat. You can see a bunch of you already have. Good on you, Greg. So, look at that. Susie's a 10, Jim's a 9, Judy is a 10. You can see it can vacillate there. Said 7 earlier. Cliff, you're a 9. There's some high scores here. Amanda, a 6. So just whacking your score, I would say today I feel a 10. So what's your score? And what's really important is to know what is behind the score. It's not just the score or the word that you might want to use to describe it if you prefer that, but it's like, do you know what the formula is that's helped you be a 9 or a 10? The place you want to be living your life from is an 8, 9, or 10. We've done a lot of work with this over the years, and there's an energy that people vibrate, but it only starts to come through in a positive, influential way from the place of being an 8. And so if you want to make a difference, and many people say, I want to make a difference, and by that we mean a positive difference, you want to do the things that get you into that place of being an 8, 9, or 10. And we've got lots of collateral that's designed to your ID that you can dig into to learn based on your ID, how do you live life best in stride, be that best version of yourself. We have a lot of material specifically for your ID, but even things like this that help you. And we built this in the webinar. What are the early warning signals? It starts from an emotional place, and it can be in your thinking before it even becomes something that's more visible in your behavior or your speech, and ultimately your health. So there's a lot here that you can think about. Okay, are you exhibiting any of the or experiencing any of these symptoms here? Because these symptoms aren't just normal, natural things that everyone has. They are also aligned to you being in or out of stride. And so the sooner you can catch yourself, it's a lot easier to get back in stride when you're only a little way off track, compared to if you're way off track and you've got to make some significant changes. Now, that being said, when people are a long way off track, the stress and the frustration is so great that it almost compels them to do something about it. People who are a 1 or a 2 out of 10 are often in a better place than someone who's a 7 or a 6, because there's a level of complacency sometimes at a 6 or 7 that when you are a 1 or 2, you cannot stand it, or other people around you can't stand it, and it forces a change. So before I go on, and this material is in the deck, so you will see this. For those of you who haven't really dug into this before, we've got this new material here from speech back through to emotion. And then we've also got a list of various health issues that typically come up when people are out of stride. So if you experience any of these things here on this page, or any things on this page, and there might be other things as well. This isn't an exhaustive list, but this is a chance for you to take stock and step back and think, okay, I have some of these. And if this is me not being in stride, because my number is only a 6 or a 7, or an 8, an 8, it's not where you want to stay. You want to look at what you can do to be a 9 or a 10. What can you do to get there? And we've got the material and the willingness to help you get to that place. So before we kick on to the rest of the webinar, does anyone have anything they would like to share or ask about their number? Especially people either, if there's anyone else who might be a 10, or if someone's got a lower number and they'd maybe like to share what's going on for them, either just so that we understand, or because you'd like maybe some insights that might help you from the group.
Well, I can share a tale from my own experience, and that is, sadly, if you don't understand your ID and you end up with major health events, you really struggle. Being an industrial electrician, I many years ago knew that you don't fix things, you try and find out what broke it. And when I had my mental breakdown, because I was the implementation manager computerizing white pages, yellow pages, New Zealand, I didn't realize the job was very, very information rich and very process structured, which is obviously the opposite of my ID. After many months of counseling and pharmaceuticals, I went, no, this is not working. So I decided to try and understand what broke my brain. And of course, Paul, I got your book. And I laugh about it because I took it to the counselor of the day, who was at the School of Medicine, and said, what we're doing is not working. And I believe the ID is the way to fix it. And he took the book off me and said, I'm the professional, I will work with your mental health. So I went and bought another copy of the book, and I took it to the psychiatrist who was doing the meds. And he looked at the book and he said, Jim, do you need my permission to get well? I go, what do you mean? He said, if you've got the answer in your hand, then get on with it. So of course, that's what happened. And I healed properly. I do laugh at the fact that the counsellor came back a year later and said, "Can I come and see you? You haven't been in for a while." And I said, "Well, I'm well." And he came round with your book and he said, "How did you get well? Here's your book." And I said, "I got well because what Paul wrote in the ID book. I think you need to keep it and start sharing it with some of your patients." That was the end of our working relationship.
No, thank you, Jim. It just shows, that principle that's been around for centuries of be true to yourself. I mean, there's power in that. So there you go. And so many of the health issues that people are literally today getting prescriptions for to go and take medication could actually be completely eradicated if people got back in stride and much more true to themselves. So thank you for sharing. It's a great example. Maybe one more before we move on, if someone's got something they would like to ask of the group about their score.
I'd like to add something to that we use with our clients. The first thing, early warning signal we often find with people is what I call energy. And I'm not sure how it manifests in a lot of these things on the charts you've got here, but it's a sense of not caring or feeling confused or being lost or giving up. It's the energy drops for whatever you're in that moment. You could be having energy for one part of a moment, but nothing for the other. And it's a really good early warning signal that, well, I'm missing my ID when the energy drops and I'm with my ID. And however, different people define energy in different ways, but it's a good sort of a catch-all, a real quick catcher, that's all.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. So simple. And, what came to mind that when you started mentioning that example, that I think everyone can relate to is when your phone rings and you see now these days, you see the name come up on the phone. You have an instant reaction of either like, "Oh, great," or no, no. You can feel the energy change, right? So, but you could say that about a meeting that you see on your calendar, whatever it might be. Watch your energy. It's a great call. Thank you, Greg. All right, one more.
I'd like to comment on that, Paul. That's exactly where I am right now. I'm getting clarity. That's why I said I'm a 10 now, because I'm in an environment that is supporting me with where I am in my life right now. A few hours ago, I was in an environment that did not support me. So I might have been lower than a 7. I don't know.
Okay.
But I'm noticing now that I need to make other decisions, get involved with other activities that will support me with where I am in my life now. And that will help me to be in stride with my ID.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you. Hey, Amanda, I've got to ask you, I know you're okay with me asking you this because you're so authentic and willing to be vulnerable through, all of these 100 webinars that we've shared. But I think you were a lower score previously. So I'm curious, how are you? And is there anything you'd be willing to share with the group about what's going on for you with your fitness?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, nothing too serious. Don't stress everybody. Just being let down by someone close to us, and I'm still kind of in shock because I really value honesty and people being upfront and transparent. And it's our nanny, and she just went back to Brazil. She was here, and she told us she was going away on a trip to Thailand, and she was going to come back next week. And last night she messaged me saying she went back to Brazil and she's not coming back. And it's like, it's nothing serious. We'll find care for Joshi, and we'll figure that out. I'm not worried about that, even though, yeah, this, I had a plan and whatever, but it's more, how people can just be like that. And it shocked me because I think I'm still early on in my life and I haven't had this many experiences of people having such different values. And we opened our home to her. She was looking after her son. She seemed to love him and whatever. Right. And I'm just like in shock that people can just be like that. I'm not sure if it's mainly values or if it's got something to do with ID as well. Joel, for example, that was last night. This morning he's already like, oh, we're gonna do this. Like he's like, okay, so action mode, what are we doing? I'm like, oh, hang on a second, join me in being, you know, surprised, and let's take a moment to process what's going on. And he's like, what's there to process? I don't want to talk about it. It's shit, it happened. Let's figure out what we're gonna do from here. I'm like, well, I need time. Like I can't go action mode just yet. I'm still, you know, surprised. Leave me here for a minute, please. And this minute
So
might take a couple of
for those
days.
who don't know Amanda's wonderful husband, Joel, he's the exact opposite of Amanda, ID wise, you know, like I think 2638 or something like that, right?
2738.
2738, a totally different ID. So we do process things like that really differently, and that is according to our ID. You can see with Amanda's ID, you need to really work it through. But Amanda, something that might just help you in a positive place, I can understand why that would rattle you, not just throwing your plans around, but the integrity of it. But they say that we only get affected, things like that rock us when they're attached to our values. So it just really validates your own value of integrity and the way you operate. So maybe take some you know, comfort from that it's something that you do exude and you do practice, which is why it stands out to you when it occurs. If you didn't have, you know, and operate with high levels of integrity, it probably wouldn't, even with your ID, it may not have rattled you quite the same. So maybe take it as a compliment that it's affected you the way it has because of what you stand for. All right, team, with that, let's move into a quick recap on the topic of today about, you know, the leadership style for 2023. So here's what we covered last time, and I'm just going to quickly refresh you on this. What are the key changes that have occurred in the world? How do they match your leadership style? Are some leadership styles feeling, you know, better off because of it, or worse off because of those changes? And then how do you go about thriving no matter what your ID is in this new world, because your ID is your ID. We're going to spend our time on, you know, really 2 and 3 today, particularly to help you sort of dig into the nuances. Just very quickly, some of the changes we talked about are on this chart here. Again, I'll send the deck out to you. Probably no real surprises, but just a whole bunch of really significant worldwide things that have occurred and are somewhat irreversible, I think, in the way that the world now operates and some of the things that it values. So let's have a look at your leadership style. With that, I'm going to stop sharing the slides and just open up to the group. There are other slides in this deck which I will leave in, which are things like this. Let me just quickly show you. And these are really powerful. So what you do with these is you look at your ID and you can look at, to be at your best, here are the things that you need if you're a verifier. Here's things to watch out for. If you're an avoid verifier, here are the things you need to be at your best. Here are things to watch out for. And then there are even strategies for each of these that you can dig into. So we've got very specific material that you can use. But let's firstly just share with each other, when you think about your own leadership style, I'd like to hear from people that feel like it changes in the world have really caused them to step back and make some changes. And I'd love to hear from maybe people we haven't heard from either for a while or before, if there's something you'd be willing to share. And particularly if you feel somewhat either challenged or advantaged by what's occurred. Or does life go on? Has anyone got anything they'd like to share about, you know, their own reflections on how they're showing up for 2023 from a leadership style point of view?
Hi there, it's Kate here. I'm feeling for the silence, so I thought I'd put my head in. I've just started joining this group and wanted to, I guess the reality is, I'm sure others are facing this, is the, you know, now that we're moving back into that hybrid space, and how do we how do we work with our IDs and our people's IDs to bring more people together. So creating that connection is where I'm trying to head this year with our, not only with myself, but with the people in our organisation. So that's something that I'm starting to think through, and that's why I jumped into this seminar to see, you know, what ideas might come out of it and what actions then, because I'm like to try and be action oriented, what we can then do about it.
Thanks, Kate. What's your ID, Kate?
Oh, you're going to put me on the spot. I think it's a 7253, something like that. I should know it off the top of my head.
8524, Kate.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. I knew it was fairly high on the first one.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you for sharing. Kate, in relation to building that connection, what are you already often doing? Have you started doing some things yourself?
For me personally, yes, I have. So I don't know where you want to head, but for me personally, I've created what I call the year of yes. I think others have probably seen or heard about that movie where someone just said yes to everything, and so I'm from my natural instinct of going, oh no, I don't think I'll do that. I'll I'll wait and see and ponder on it. I'm just saying yes. So that's something I'm doing personally, and enjoying that so far. And then the other part is where we're sort of working with one of your practitioners to build sort of ID in the organisation and build that awareness amongst our leadership group. So that's, I guess, the other high-level piece that we're working on.
Good. Thank you. Well, we'll address your question. In terms this point about building connection is huge for the hybrid working model, because people, if you think about the two things that have changed as a result of the hybrid working model, one is connection and the other is boundaries. Like if you think about what we almost could take for granted, there was a natural boundary that occurred with work and home, that distinction, because you went to work and you came home from work. There was that physical change that allowed people to, they had a boundary, like they left work at work, and when they got home, they were home. And the hybrid model, our virtual model, has blurred those lines. And for people that never thought about boundaries or struggle with being assertive with many things, including boundaries, that's been one of the real challenges that they've faced. So you might want to think about that as we contemplate, more conversation today. How have the issue of boundaries been for you? Has that been a struggle? Has it been easy? Have you put some new boundaries in place? And I'm thinking particularly if you have, sharing that could be really helpful to other people, because I tell you, boundaries has been a really big issue. But the other one is connection, because what came naturally from a connection point of view was you were around people, and you would, even though you would be working and maybe not talking to someone, you still would go to the restroom, or you would go and get a coffee, or, pass someone in a corridor, and you just invariably got to have a chat, that little connection that would happen. But when you're working in a virtual world, people now tend to connect via a meeting. And if you listen to many meetings, the way they start is straight into business. There's very little sharing of, they might say, how was your weekend? And someone says, I had a great weekend. How was yours? No, it was great. Okay, well, let's get into the agenda. There's no real conversation about, well, what did you do on the weekend? How did you feel about it? Do you even know anything about my personal life? So they're two areas that were sort of given to us as gifts when we had the old working model, that have been really blurred by the new virtual world. So I would love to hear from people who have come up with some ideas, to Kate's point, on connection as well as on boundaries. What are you doing, either personally or with in your teams, to build more connection? Okay, any reactions? Specifically, helping Kate with what she had.
I have something that I've been doing. It's really important. I think a lot of us, because what tends to have happened here is we take on more meetings, and people are having more meetings than ever, because they can put them back to back. There's no time in the car. They're at their computer all day. So I think it's important to make an effort to really have that personal connection before you dive into a conversation about the work that you want to do or the thing you want to meet about. Because people just tend to go from one thing to the other. And I think it's really important to establish that connection as, hey, we're people having a conversation.
Yeah. So I would say if we bring ID into that, Pam, thank you for sharing that. So getting really intentional about it. You know, when I think about that from an ID point of view and that question about are some people more advantaged, I'm going to be provocative here, and I'm to the authenticators, in case you'd like to react and share maybe a completely different view on this. But I feel like that's where the avoid authenticates have an advantage, because like if I think about myself as a one in authenticate, it's just my nature to want to connect and dig into the sort of the personal side of what's going on in someone's life more than the work. You know, I can have meetings that 25 minutes we spent on connection and 5 minutes we get to the work in a bottom line sort of way. So connection's not something I struggle with or have to think too hard to do. It's natural, it's instinctive. If someone said to me, you can't do that, the hybrid model means you've got to dig more into the work and just get straight to it, I would feel shallow, empty. I'd feel like I'd have to have another call to cover the connection stuff. You know, that's how important it is to me, right? So I don't know that then would the sort of the other side to that is it harder for the authenticators working more virtually in a hybrid world because you are getting straight into the work and the issue of connection, it's somehow showing up, right? That's the sort of thing I think would be really rich to understand from a call like this. So can we hear maybe from our authenticators on the point of connection and how that's been for you?
Paul, can I share? Joe. Hi. Yeah, that's been what I found probably is in the field. I mean, I haven't really stopped getting out and seeing people. But what I found is that when people say, what do you want to do, Zoom or Connect or face-to-face, even though I'm a high authenticator, I still feel the need to get out and meet those people, and it's almost like we had a shortcut to
so what you're saying, Joe,
getting
is
to business that face-to-face.
Your audio is sort of breaking up a little bit, so I think what you're saying is that the way that you're making sure you still can connect with people is by still getting out and talking to people face-to-face.
Correct.
What about the people that are working more virtually? Joe, would you mind going back on me? Thank you. I mean, what about the people working more virtually who are authenticators? How's that working for you? Cliff, you're looking at like you're about to say something.
Yeah, I am, but I want to give everybody else a chance to talk. But since you called me, I will. I'm notorious for wanting to dive into a meeting and get the work done. And it's not for any, I think it's just when it occurs. Like for me, the most natural flow is, okay, we're here for this call. Let's get this stuff done. Hey, look, we banged it out in 15 minutes. Now we got 15 minutes to sit and chat about everything else that's going on. So that's just much more of a natural flow. I think the benefit of ID is that for me personally, it makes me more aware to reverse that when I'm working with certain folks. I know with some people on the team, I can just jump on the call and we can just dive right in, and then we can chit chat after we've accomplished what we were set to accomplish. And other folks, it gives me a chance to let's just reverse it. We'll still get it done, but we're just going to do it in a different way.
Yeah. Well, so the point you're making is, I love this about ID. Just by being aware, of both your own ID and the needs then of others, to Kate's point, and there will be that diversity in teams, just being the person that goes, hey, before we get into the agenda, let's just check in. Right. One of the ways that we do that sounds like we're on point with an agenda, but it provokes a really personal conversation, is to do the peak performance check-in. Like we did earlier in this call, but we did this publicly, right? But you put your answers in chat. But in a team, we have many teams around the world that when they meet, say they do it typically monthly, but they start by saying, hey guys, let's just check in on what our peak performance score is. Everyone shares their number or where they're at. And then they have a conversation around it. Like, wow, that's a surprise that you're a 5. Tell us what's going on. People learn more about it. And so it helps provide that connection. So I would really encourage you in your teams to think about having the peak performance indicator as part of the language of your team and part of the ritual of the regular check-in, because it does not only give you a read on where people are at, but it helps with that point of connection. The second point, to Cliff's point, is about being more intentional about it and making sure that you spend the time in a meeting, whether it's first or later, but it depends on the mix of your team, to understand where people are at personally, and that's not goofing off or wasting time. Connection is as critical to a healthy team as it is getting the work done.
I think that was a key insight for me, Paul, which was I had to reframe it as it's not goofing off and not wasting time.
Right.
Because, I get so focused on we're here to do this that, the other stuff just becomes a distraction of some sort. And I had to seriously reframe my thinking around that.
Right. I remember when I started meeting with the most senior leader that I'd ever worked with, some of you know who I'm referring to, back sort of much earlier in my coaching career. And I would sit in his office and we went for an hour's meeting, and I'd have a list because I'm like, oh, if I'm going to meet with this guy, I better make sure I've got this list and be really productive. And we would talk for like 45 minutes of the 1 hour, maybe a bit longer, on all this sort of just connection talk of him and me and how we've been going. And then I'd say, well, I've got these things to talk about. And you just look at the list and goes, yeah, they're all good. Yeah, get on with them. They're great. And there'd be hardly any conversation on the work. But I think it was because the connection built a level of trust and confidence. And those two currencies were probably more important to him and equally to myself. We knew then that the rest of it would fall out. If there was any sort of areas of confusion or ambiguity, we have enough confidence from those connection conversations to just get on with it. So I really would say for some people it might be a case, Cliff, of reframing that it's not goofing off, but then getting intentional to make sure you spend the time one way or the other. Bring in an icebreaker game or just spend the time asking the question. I find it uncanny how many teams, like I would say every team, like that's how common it is. It's not 70%, it's like 99% of teams, the people don't know what each other does. They might know their title, they might know that they're married or not married, but they probably don't know what's going on in their personal lives, but they don't even know what they're working on as a colleague. So spending time just to understand each other's world, what's important to them, what are they caring about, what's keeping them up at night. Like you may not do everyone all the time, but just hearing from a couple of people to build that connection bridge is not just valuable, it's essential in a team in today's world. Can I ask about boundaries? What about boundaries when it comes to your leadership style and the way you operate, and maybe some of the things you notice in your team? Who has had a challenge with boundaries or has found it easier to work with? It's a big challenge out there. So I wonder who here has encountered that or needs help with it.
Paul, what is it that you exactly mean by boundaries?
So for some people, they feel like, if you go back to the start of the virtual world, it all had to do with trust, didn't it? Leaders would go, but I can't, if I'm not seeing them, how do I know if they're working? So it was all around trust. And there was that question of, are people going to be more productive when they're working from home? Because some people argued that they weren't getting interrupted all the time. So they felt more productive. But then once it became more part of the norm and more the whole week, people not only were more productive, they were just working longer because they would get out of bed and could be at their desk or they could be online within minutes, and then instead of sort of saying, well, I work from 8 to 6, they get immersed in their work. They were starting before 8. Some people said, well, of course I'm more productive because the hour that I used to spend commuting to work and the hour spending coming home from work, I can now use them for work. But then they didn't then stop at that hour, they keep going. So what tended to disappear first were things like their fitness routines. you know, and then it's family time. And then once they have their dinner and get the kids to bed, they'd be back online. Whereas before, when they felt like they'd left work, that didn't happen. So the boundaries are where there were these divisions between what was work and what was personal. That's what I'm referring to there, Pam, as opposed to like, your personal values.
I will say, along with what you're saying, I deal with a lot of high-level executives who are very time-starved, and it's starting to filter down more. I think one of the challenges that people have in a virtual world is they get invited to meetings and they say yes because they're not seen otherwise, and they have this need to be seen, to be involved. And so, to the earlier discussion around connection, I think this is where a lot of people are losing time because they're afraid to say no to something because people will forget them or not be connected to them or see them. It's the only way they have of showing they're involved and working. So I think a lot of those challenges have come up as far as putting in boundaries, like what do you say no to? And I know that's more of a 7 and improvise comment, but for a lot of us, that reactiveness to, oh gosh, I better say yes to this so I can be in the tribe.
Yep. Well said. Thank you, Pam.
Yeah, Paul, Steve here. Interesting boundaries. I, as Michelle, work for an international organization and working with a team in Chennai, which are 5.5 hours behind the number of meetings, and also the UK. So we get a lot of meetings from around 7:30 through to 9:30 at night. And recently I've just had to say no, put the boundary around. That's I might go out to dinner with my wife one night. I'm not going to disturb that to engage a meeting. So I put a boundary around that I say no. The other example I've got is during COVID, one of my managers had the exact opposite, where he had a 5-year-old boy who wasn't going very well being at home because he couldn't play with his mates. So the manager just said to me, can I take time off between 1 o'clock and 3:30 in the afternoon to be with my son, to entertain him and play with him, and then pick up the hours later on? I said, totally fine. So he put boundaries around the distraction of his family, but allowed his family to get on well. He had a son and daughter. His daughter was going okay, but his son was struggling. So he took time out to manage that. So we put a boundary around looking after his family. And then he caught up after hours when the kid was asleep and that sort of stuff. So that's being flexible in the hybrid. So sort of 2 examples of working with boundaries and inclusiveness, which is a point you raised a few weeks ago, Paul. How do you include people, and which is about connection as well. So yeah, interesting challenges.
Well, so thank you for sharing, Steve. They're great examples, but what it shows is from you and your team, there was a desire to have that inclusivity and connection. And if you didn't connect with the person to understand what was going on in their world, you wouldn't have known to then bring the flexibility to the table.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think the connection, so connection, you hear some people talking about connection, but the other word that comes up a lot now in the hybrid world that didn't before as much, but I think it's because of the lack of connection, is this point about visibility and being seen, being heard, being understood for who I am. Because when people are only being valued for their work, or it's only their work that's being seen, and the humanness is not being reflected in the relationship, then they feel invisible, and it's a horrible feeling. Like, people can say they lack connection, but when someone says they lack visibility, or they don't feel visible, honestly, it lands for me emotionally as if they've been like violated. It's where someone would say they've been physically abused or sexually abused or emotionally abused. It's the same feeling for me when someone says they feel invisible, like when they share it, the emotion they share it with. So I think we've got to be really conscious for those of us in leadership positions. And I would say the same thing even within our families of, where people are living and working away and we don't see them as often, making sure that there really is still this maintenance of the connection. And that, I think the way to know that you're there is if what you're talking about is feelings related as opposed to, action related. Like, what have people been doing? That's, that's good. And it's still good to understand that. But how are they feeling and where are they at emotionally? If there's a sharing along that level, that means more authenticity, more vulnerability, and more connection. And then the person will feel more visible. But that issue of visibility has, I don't know about you guys, but I've never heard it as often as I have in the last few years being an issue within teams. I've just been watching the chat as that unfolds as well. I love all the comments that are in the chat. And Greg, one of the things that you expressed, I think is worth calling out, both for the strategy, but just for the principle behind it. I was making the comment that it maybe is tougher for authenticators because it's more natural for you to get into the work as opposed to build the connection. But your ID, and this is where people, will say, I don't want to use my ID as an excuse. And it's exactly right, because what you saw, if you read Greg's chat, was he said, well, what I do is I need things to be real. And so therefore, to keep it real, I check in. I don't know whether you want to say anything to that, Greg. I don't want to speak for you, but I thought it was just a great example of how not only you attack the issue of connection, but how you use your ID. The very thing that might give you a vulnerability is also the same thing you draw on in order to attack that vulnerability and turn it into a strength.
Yeah, I just feel that if I've got a question or I'm wondering about something or I'm not feeling connected, I wonder who else is. I want to see who else was with me. And so to me, it's a natural thing to just go, where is everyone? Maybe it's come from being a trainer for 30 years. I don't know, but I don't find this boundary thing a problem because I'm always checking it, if you know what I mean. And for me, the word boundary means, where are you? That's the edge. Where's the edge for us right now? So this change for COVID and all that hasn't done much. I don't see much difference because it's just a new it's a new paddock. So we still have to have boundaries. So and the more often I check in, the more feedback I get, and the less I need a boundary. If that makes sense.
Greg, in the work that you've done, would you say the issue of boundaries have you noticed that, not for yourself, but for the people you've been, in teams or people you're coaching, has it been something that stood out to you? It hasn't come up like that as a topic. Well, I guess you get ahead. It's more like, what do I need to do? It's more function related to particular things I have to do. So rather than get to the concept of boundary, we're going, what are you gonna do with this? What are you gonna do with that? So we get more practical with and it's a step back to go, oh, that turns out to be a boundary issue, but with me, I'm working more on what are you gonna do now and what has to happen next and that sort of stuff, Yeah. So the early warning signal is really important. Like as soon as I find myself going dark, or getting cranky about something, then I've missed something. So, okay, what do I do about? Not what makes me go crank or darky, cranky or dark, right? Does that make sense? It's more situational, I think. Right. Anyone have anything else on boundaries or connection or ideas, particularly on building connection and being assertive with boundaries?
One, Paul, I find people don't take into account is, yes, our instinctive drives are very important. The other one is our circadian rhythm. In other words, if we're a morning person, then we need to set some boundaries around the end of day. Our brains are toast and we're not that productive. And then conversely, if we're a afternoon person or evening person, then we need to set boundaries around in the morning. We don't function properly and therefore we're not at our best, and we are destructive in terms of the work we produce against our careers. So in terms of my people, we have a glide time here where they come in their circadian rhythm time. So Rick wouldn't come in till 10 or 11 o'clock, but he's still here at 7 o'clock. And then conversely, I'm rattling around at 5 in the morning, but I have to say to people at 3, 4 in the afternoon, my brain's toast, I've actually got to go. Now, part of that's because I burnt my brain out and I now know I need to protect it. But it's more the other way. If you want to protect your career and be at your best, then take time to understand your circadian rhythm and when you're at your best, and make sure your meetings and your thinking or your thinking processes align to that. So low level thing you do when your brain's toast, high level stuff is when you make yourself available to achieve the things you need to.
Well said. Thank you, Jim. You know, I think one of the things when I think about this, the masterclass and sharing nuances, there's something I think is worth sharing with this particular class on this topic, and thinking a lot about your question, Kate, right at the beginning about, you know, how in this hybrid world do we build more connection? And I think when you are, as you explore this self-awareness journey and become better at it, there's a real shift from emphasizing or what you value being around what you do to how you are being. You know, it's the being more than the doing that starts to get more of your attention. And so when you think about when you're younger in your career, so much of the focus is on your doing, you know, and as you move more into positions of leadership, it's not about how much you know and how much you do and the effort and the volume of productivity. It's about your influence and the humanness of how you are with people. And a lot of that's not what you're doing. It's just how you show up and who you are being. And I would say that's been, when you think about connection and even this concept of boundaries, it's for an advanced class on this, I think it's worth us thinking about this difference between doing and being in all of that, because I can see people putting in place boundaries and saying, yes, you know, I put a boundary in place that we have date night on Wednesday night. But when they're at date night, they're not really at date night. You know, they're not present to date night. They're still distracted by other things. So the boundaries are a little bit forced. So they're doing the right thing in terms of they've, you know, put a boundary in place. They're now at date night. It all looks good on their calendar. But if you said, who are you being when you're on date night? You're actually still being a worker. You know, you're distracted by the work. And so being really present to how you are being, not just doing the things we're talking about, you know, in the hybrid working model, having more connection. And so you might do the PPI check-in as a way, that's what you're doing in order to build connection. But who are you being in that process? Are you being authentic? Are you being vulnerable? You know, are you intentionally present to building that connection? I think, and you applied the same thing with boundaries. You can say, well, I put a boundary in place because of my circadian rhythm. As Jim says, I'm best working out in the morning. But were you really working out, or were you distracted with work? You know, and what do you need to do to get there? You know, like to get to that place of being present. Your ID will give you the clues on that. But I think that's a really important thing at a more advanced level, is to not just do these things we're talking about, but be aware of who you are being as you're doing those things and being fully present to them. And, you know, when I always find myself, when I share these things, it's like, I feel like back at you, Paul, you know, like you're probably sharing this because this is what you need to pay most attention to yourself. So that's what's occurring to me right now as I'm sharing that with you.
Hey, Paul, you just reminded me of something. That why I check in so much is because I really don't know what someone just heard. I really don't know what sense it made. I don't know how they felt about it. I don't know what they're going to do with it. I don't even know what's going on with their life. So how can I really know what impact I'm having? Thank you, Phil. And so that's why I check in, because I think when we make assumptions about what people did or why they did something or what they're doing, they're almost always wrong because we don't have the full picture. And so even just from a practical point of view, you don't really know those big five, what they heard, what it sounded, what it meant to them, what they felt, what they're going to do about it, and what else is going on in their life. And I just think it's just a practical thing to do more than It's nice, but it's also very practical.
I love how you use your ID to combat the vulnerability, Greg. I mean, one of the best things I learned as we were sort of discovering all the nuances of ID, because we used to talk about there are strengths to your ID and then there are vulnerabilities. And then I realized, oh, the very strength actually gives you a vulnerability, you know, and the vulnerability gives you a strength, and you can't run from any of it. You can't say, well, that's, you know, I'll use these people to do that. Like, you can actually attack it yourself. You're hearing Greg express that right now, you know, needs to know how things really work, being practical. So connection is absolutely possible from for authenticators if you just come at it from a different angle, using that very same drive that gave you the vulnerability in the first place. And the same is true for every other issue about every other drive. You know, the very thing that gives you a challenge actually holds the key to you turning it into a strength, and you can't run from it. I love that, you know, I love that. Anyway, we're just about out of time, guys. Another great class. Is there anything anyone wants to share before we wrap for the day? Okay, well, then we might leave it there today. Thank you for being on the call. I will just let you know that between now and the next class, I won't be the one leading the next couple of classes. Susie and I get married next Saturday, not this coming Saturday, but the one after, and we'll be away for a couple of weeks. So very exciting time in our lives, and we're very excited, looking forward to it. We feel a lot of love from everybody, including people around us in this community. So we'll look forward to seeing you and sharing some of that with you when we come back. I guess it'll be in a month or so's time. In the meantime, one of my really good friends and a colleague on our team, who's just a whiz facilitator, a rock star, is Alona McCulloch, and she will be leading these sessions, the Living in Stride webinar in March, and the masterclass as well. So enjoy her. I'm sure she'll bring a different style to the group, and she's new to many of you, but she's a wonderful person. You'll enjoy the experience, and we'll check back in with you when we're back. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.